Welcome, everybody, and a special welcome to my good friend Jeremy on this
Hi.
TNG episode 12, I think. And the tea that I have is peace, because I've been having a rough day and just trying to bring in some peace. How are you doing, Jeremy? Let everybody know a bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm doing good. My name is Jeremy Renta. I am a massage therapist, a healer, a Reiki practitioner. I am a magician. I am a musician. I kind of do all the things. I got into doing a lot of this magic work. I've always known that magic was real. You know, it's something that you have to learn to ignore. I think that the older you get. So as a kid, I loved being able to kind of elicit emotion from people to help people kind of like process whatever it is that they're dealing with. As a kid, the main emotion was laughter. So getting people to laugh was a big part of it. And the older that I got, I realized I could do that through acting. And I realized that I could do that through film editing. So as a storyteller. And my spiritual journey has been, it's ranged from ayahuasca ceremonies to, I grew up in the Southeast as in a Christian church, and found my way into Kabbalism and Vedic mantra, and all of these healing languages that we use language as a way to kind of lie to each other, it seems like, in modern society. And I wanted to figure out a way that we could do it in a more helpful way. So I started working with toning, started working with mantras, started working with Hebrew and Sanskrit, and it's currently working on learning Enochian. So, I mean, that's just the surface, but that's who I am, at least kind of starting out.
Excellent. I mean, to put things into perspective, our topic today is talking about Hebrew magic, and one of the things that maybe it's right time and right place for me to be a bit agitated, a bit amped up today, because recently and over the past few years, and I think my whole life really, the English language has really been a frustration point, and myself as well, having dived into Hebrew and Sanskrit, ancient languages, there's something a bit more emotional, as you're talking about bringing out that emotion, but also a bit more mystical. And one of the things that is really hard to do with the English language is to convey emotion. It's all very linear, it's very Germanic, very labeling things, egoic, you, me, we, she, all this like separation consciousness. But when you go into Hebrew and you go into Sanskrit, you get a bit of a different flavor where you have this, like if I say O mahum, Ayam kam ram lam, shude ah. That's Tibetan Sanskrit, an ancient language like Hebrew, but it has a different potency, I think, than to a language like English. So what is your take on that, and how the Hebrew language has a sort of mysticism to it?
Well, I mean, the fact that Hebrew is read right to left is a big part of it. There's front speech and back speech, right? So with most of our languages, with English, we read left to right, and I think part of it is it's a processing thing. It's the way that our brain processes. There's a lot with like the way that our eyeballs actually take information in. So when you're looking at it from a written standpoint, if you're reading right to left, there's the energy is going the opposite direction. And so I feel like with Sanskrit and with Hebrew, I know I'm gonna keep mentioning Sanskrit just because that's what I started with. Hebrew has really become my passion as of recently, over the past like 4 or 5 years. But Hebrew, part of it is the fact that it's almost like you're reading backwards, and it's almost like your mind is moving backwards. The way that the energetic of the words and of the sounds and of the shapes of the letters, it's processed differently in our brain. I posted a couple of days ago of a picture of, you know, the Hebrew alphabet overlaid on top of the Star of David. And, you know, when we think of like the English language or most Germanic languages, it's a lot of like angles. We don't really think of like why the letters mean what the letters mean. And one of the cool things about Hebrew is that you can take it and you can overlay it so that you see which parts of the energetic of, you know, of the Star of David, or of the, you know, the tetrahedron, which energies are being activated through the tones. So, you know, we have, we're getting to the point in our scientific understanding where we, you know, we get that waves and particles are the same thing. Depending on the observer, it's how the thing is going to show up, right? So for a lot of these words and a lot of these things that we're saying, if you, I think about it like coloring with light, right? Because this is a light language. So if you say certain words and you start to vibrate those tones inside of your energy body or inside of your energy field, then certain things are going to become brighter and certain things are going to become darker, right? So they're going to make certain things kind of stand out. If you've ever been to a 3D movie, you've got a blue lens and you got a, you know, a red lens. So the two things kind of overlay and you get to see a perspective. Your brain takes the information in and makes it into a three-dimensional image. That's kind of what, from my understanding. Again, I'm not going to say anything is definitive. I'm definitely not a, you know, an old Jewish rabbi who could speak too much to this. But from my understanding, from my experience with it, by being able to work with these tones and work with these energies, especially with angelic energies, you're drawing in more of that vibration into your body. And so you experience the world completely differently. And you're not really shifting the world around you, you're shifting your perspective, right? So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I remember that post that you made about how the tetrahedron or the Star of David connects with the Hebrew language, and really, really love that post. And one of the things that it reminds me of is I had this very mystical experience in a deep meditation. It's like a deep meditation dream state where I was basically shown what I was doing when I was transforming energy, transmuting energy. So this is coming back to the magic of the Hebrew languages. I was visualizing myself. This vision just came. It wasn't like I was trying to see myself in this light. It was a vision of myself as a Buddhist monk. And I had a gold and purple kind of robes that were crossed over. And around me in a sort of sphere was these golden Hebrew letters. And it was like this good feeling. It was a feeling. These letters were a feeling surrounding me in my energy field. And then I would feel external fear or dark energy, literally in the form of like this gucky, shadowy sort of mist energy that was coming at me. And then through the transmutation process, it would hit my golden letters or my aura or these Hebrew light language and be sent back out in Hebrew letters, but rainbow colored. And this was sort of this alchemy that came from this heart presence and being in this energy of transmutation, of healing, and being able to take energies and send them back outwards. And this is something that the Hebrew people knew because they were writing a language that came from the nature of reality. When we have Latin and English and Arabic, these languages are kind of skewed. They're not really representations of what reality actually is. But when you connect into Hebrew, this is something that can not only be heard and spoken, but it's there. It's physically, spiritually, metaphysically present in everyone's life, not just people who are working with Hebrew magic. It's literally light language.
Well, it's the things that we have, casually started or have been casually ignoring, in our actual existence for so long.
Mm.
You know, being a healer and being a magician, like one of the most important things that I think that we can do is doing our own shadow work, right? Like you have to clear your own shadow before you can actually see what's going on around you. So, making sure that you are dealing with your own reality, your own internal reality is incredibly important before you can, start to say that something else or someone else is your problem, right? So, a lot of the times we deal with, if we don't deal with a lot of our stresses, it shows up in our dreams. So when that happens, you've got things that are on top of light, right? Because the only way that we can see something is if light is there for it to reflect off of it. And if we're not dealing with our own shadow, or we're not dealing with our own inner turmoils, then that can show up in our dreams as nightmares. It can show up in repetitive behavioral patterns that we have in our daily life. It can start to show up and manifest in a physical form in knots in our body. And being able to process through a lot of that stuff is one of the most important things if you're going to become if you are going to start climbing the tree of life, if you're going to start working with any of the Sephiroth, you have to clean up your house first. So you need to start working first at Malkut. You have to separate yourself from any of the stuff that's in the Qliphothe. And if anybody doesn't know what these words are, the tree of life is it's the representation of the 10 spheres that make up the energetics of the entire universe. It's not just us, it's as above, so below. And the Qlipah is the reversed version of that. So it's everything that's down into the earth. It's stuff that has become so connected and entrenched with its own emotional state, its own it's been too tainted by the things around it, so that it's not actually able to express itself, right? So whether you're working, if you're working with your own demonic energies, you're working with your own demons, being able to embrace them and to clear them so that you can actually get to the core of what the energetic is incredibly important. And a big part of that is starting to use some of these languages, because again, we use our words to be able to communicate ideas. I use language to be able to draw an image in your head so that you can think what I'm thinking. And we do that because we have become so separated from each other. Like where we are right now in our current state is that way, and it's part of the cultural repression that we're having to deal with. We have, the government saying that the government is saying you have to stand 6 feet apart from each other. This has been going on for a year now, where you can't be engaged with each other, where you can't be in somebody else's energy field. And so we have to use language, or you have to use imagery. So you have to use light to be able to communicate something to somebody else. So this is tangential, and the majority of this conversation most likely will be, because it's hard for me to stick with the topic. But making sure that you feel good in your own experience is incredibly important, which is one of the things that I absolutely love about the work that I do with massage therapy, is helping people relieve grief, helping people to clear a lot of the stuff that they may be holding on to from their own past, from past lives, from their family's repression, any of the other types of stuff, bad experiences that they've had. So one of the other cool things that I like about working in Hebrew and working in Sanskrit is the fact that I don't know what these words mean. Starting out, you have no idea. You're just making sounds with your mouth. You know that, somebody can say that Raphael is the archangel that, that rules over the East, and he rules over healing, and he rules over the sunrise. But it's just, again, it's a metaphor. Everything in magic and everything in our life is a metaphor for trying to understand something, because truth is subjective. So I think that for me, being able to start working with a lot of these things as tones, like I said, when I first started kind of getting into this, I was doing it as a massage therapist, and started to realize, once I had these energies starting to interact with me in ceremony, that they were like, I like what you're doing. Let me see if I can help you in other ways. So the physical and somatic aspects of these languages is, I mean, it's the truth, right? Because you're vibrating whenever you're using some of these words, you're vibrating through we'll say the four worlds that kind of make up the reality of the tree of life. We've got, if we're basing it off of the Bible, we know that Yeshua or Jehovah is the name of God, or at least one of the names of God. In Hebrew, that's Yud He Vav He, right? So that's Yud for fire, He for water, Va for air, and the final He for earth. And so those aspects are the things that make up all of reality in our experience as well, right? So if you're using words, you're vibrating in the world of Yetzirah. If you're dealing with something physically, you're in Asiya, you're in the actual physical world. But all of these things make up the full experience of what we are, which is where the crossover is between Western Hermetic magic and Hebrew, right? Because with the pentagram, we've got the same thing, except for we include spirit in there, and that's the name of Jesus or Yeshua, right? So that's the five elements that combine to make the world that we experience. So using any of these words or any of these any of this language helps us to actually experience different realms in these worlds, and for us to be able to express our I guess kind of like to experience it, and then to be able to try to put to words what the experience actually is. I know that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, such good information to ponder upon. And one of the things that stood out in my mind for whatever reason was I was just reading an ancient Hebrew text, and one of the things that was being described in this text is that originally, so this is a prayer I was reading, originally the Hebrew people believed that Satan was the ego, which is just, I read that and of course we all, at a heart level, at the deepest level of our soul, we all know this. But in terms of separation, right? Whenever we feel separate, that's what you described, and what kind of got me thinking about this is our own demons. When we feel like, oh, I'm suffering, or I'm afraid, or that person is evil, or that person is good, or that person's better than me or worse, that's what the ancient Hebrew mystics believed to be the evil in the world, is this sort of energy of I'm different than you, I am worth more, or you're worth less, or I'm worth less and you're worth more. And with that being said and brought to light, in all of my personal suffering, and then I go into the ego, right? My personal suffering, everything has to do with ego. If I could just rip off my ego right now, and I wish I fucking could, I wish it was that easy, then there would be nothing but just peace and bliss and tranquility. But it's as many great sages have described, the more as above below, like you were saying, as above so below, the brighter your light, the more enlightened, so to speak, you become, the better a healer you become, the better wisdom keeper you become, the darker that ego becomes, the deeper those depths of hell within your own being become. And that's part of the tree of life, is it, that wisdom goes even to not only my Ashkenazi Jewish ancestors, but my Nordic ancestors. And that concept in the Nordic tree of life is that we have Hel, hell, and hell is this realm of apparent separation. It's like this realm of suffering that happens from this sort of primal dragon energy that's like I must survive and destroy others to sustain myself. And now I'm the one going on a tangent, but
that's okay. Again, dude, let's just like having a conversation about this kind of stuff is all I want to do. So,
yeah.
I mean, what you're talking about too in Tibetan Buddhism is I think it's the Bardo state, like the realm of the hungry ghosts, right? So it's these things that have these tiny mouths and they can't consume enough. Like we get confused whenever we come down here. We have this selective memory that we choose to have. You know, I'm going to say that we choose to have it, but I also kind of believe that the structure of our solar system is broken, so we're not able to actually function completely the way that we are made to function. I think that's part of the fall, like the whole idea of the fall of mankind. Again, if you're looking at the Tree of Life, and if you don't know, if you're listening to this and you haven't seen the Tree of Life, you can either Google it, and I meant to actually post it on my Instagram page, so it would be a good plug. I'll post one after this, so you can just go and take a look at a picture of it. It's going to have the 10 spheres and the paths that are on it. But the concept of the fall, and if you do want to take a moment and you want to go look up a picture of the Tree of Life, go do that. Okay, if you've got it now, here we go. So the fall of man, at least again, from my understanding, and anything that I'm talking about is going to be from my perspective. It's not going to be from something I read in a book. It'll be things that I gleaned from my learnings. But the fall is, you know, we think of Christ as the arms out, and Christ represents the first 5 spheres on the Tree of Life. So his feet are at Malkut, his genitals are at Yesod, which is the same thing for us. His 2 hands where he's been crucified are the 2 spheres of Netzach and Hod, and then his heart would be at Tiferet, and then the rest of it would be, you know, that's above. Those are the spheres that we can't reach, and those are the spheres that Christ is not technically attaining to, because he is the physical representation of God in a human form. From my understanding, the fall is that whole thing crumbling down. Christ is the Son of Man, and he is up there doing this. We don't have access to that. He died for our sins. So we're just down here at the bottom. We're down here in Malkut. We're down here, you know, dealing with our own egos and all of our own shadows and all of the demons and our desires, all the things that we want to try to like fill. You know, we're trying to cram all that stuff into these tiny mouths in our experience, and we're not even looking up. We're not even taking a look up and seeing the other places that we can go. So, you know, we don't have to stay down here. That's the really great thing about Hebrew magic as well, is that once you start to kind of let go of some of these things, and again, this is another Buddhist tenet, like all of life is suffering. The second tenet is suffering stems from attachment, right? So letting go of some of these things. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy or experience the world. Like being able to come down here and get pissed off is part of the human existence, a part of the human experience. You know, pain is part of the human experience. Like we for some reason, we put a hierarchy on emotions, and we say that joy is the greatest, and that's, you know, that's the one that we want the most. But, you know, I like watching boxing. I like watching MMA. You know, that's part of like seeing. It's not even aggression. It's just like it's a different form of expression. So I think the whole like the concept of like the warrior priest is really appealing to me, because again, the more that I start to kind of do is the more I start to do my own work, and the more I start to do shadow work and clearing my own ego attachments, then I start to realize, you know, at first I think I would say like enlightenment, but like as we start to kind of come into this space, we feel a sense of separation, right? Like you said, there's somebody else who's the bad guy. As we start to kind of like do our own mindfulness practice, we start to see that it's all us, which is still very ego-based, that needs to be changed. So we clear some of that stuff. And then as we get past that, we start to realize that there are demons out there. There are other things that we have to kind of like work, I don't want to say against, but work towards, right? Because I think we all work better together. And as long as we still are separated from ourselves, and as long as we still consider ourselves separated from each other, then we're not going to be able to actually live in some type of harmonious state where we can raise to a higher vibration.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the concept of Christ within the concept of Hebrew magic, because having been raised one side of my family very agnostic atheist in one side, very fiercely Christian. I've gone through this major roller coaster, whereas first, just putting it out there, kids know what's up. Kids have come right from the spirit realm through the yoni, through the womb space, out through the mother. And whatever realm they came from, they might have come from the depths of hell, some of these kids, and popped out. Or they might have come from the highest bodhisattva realms, the angelic realms, where all Raphael and these higher archetypes are coming from. But kids know what's up. They come down and they know what's up. And I remember telling one of my family members when I was a kid, they were very fiercely like, oh, you need to love Jesus, you need to submit your life to Christ and all this bullshit. And I was like, God is right here in your heart, right? That's every beat is a footstep. And that's out of all, I've studied almost every single spirituality on this planet, immersed myself in almost every spirituality upon the planet. And I continually come up to this dichotomy I have within my ancestral lineage. So this dichotomy having this pure Ashkenaz Jewish ancestry and then European Christian ancestry. And there's several distinctions that I want to make between the two. Is the concept of warrior priest, like a Jedi or like a sort of Merlin or Gandalf type figure, or like these sort of mystical hero archetypes, was very much so promoted in old Judaic culture. And they even had a phrase for these warrior priests as Yadai, which means friend of God. And like, if you were named Michael, you were to be a warrior. You were to be on the front line, sort of battling for the universal spirit, which they considered Jah, which they considered the ultimate and the unnameable one. But when you look at Christianity, it's almost entirely a front for what the old Hebrew people would consider Satanism, which is separation. The idea, oh, Christ died for you, which means, okay, now there's not only a separation between God and man, but there's a God man that's better than you and dying for you, and no one else can be magic, no one else can be the hero, it's all him. And this is going to rattle people's bones, but I've lived through the suffering that separation consciousness causes. And to come out the other side of it, there's this deep wisdom of, oh, when you detach people from the concept of they are a part of this universe, and now they're looking out and saying, save me, save me, save me, then there's this sort of hopelessness that comes from putting your hope external. And to consolidate that a bit more, there's been numerous people, heroes, mystical heroes, that have died upon the cross. There's been numerous heroes that have died by being hung, died in prison, martyrs. Look at Martin Luther King got shot. So we don't go walking around carrying that hero's
a gun to represent.
Yeah, and there's a really great documentary called Caesar's Messiah on Netflix, which is a really good representation and illustration of the differences between Roman Catholicism ancient Hebrew magic. And one of the major influential points in Hebrew magic's history is the pinnacle of the Roman Empire, right? You have this tiny little Hebrew kingdom where some of my ancestors come from called Judea. Now, Judea was old Hebrew mystic kingdom, but tiny. It was a little tiny kingdom. This massive red dragon of the Roman Empire comes in and tries to swallow it up. Can't. Historically, there's proof for this. Multiple battles, wars. Roman Empire can't defeat this tiny little kingdom of Judea, which speaks to the power of the mysticism and the faith that they had. But things started to change when they started using mental warfare. And this is, as you were describing, like the power of your perspective, the power of your words and language. Is there was a time where the Caesar, and there was many Caesars, it wasn't just one, captured Josephus, who was a Jewish war priest. So he was basically like a kind of a Jedi type of archetype of a warrior, but he was also very deeply mystical in the Hebrew arts. And so the Roman Empire captures him and forces him to rewrite the holy books, rewrite the Jewish texts, and make it look like the Caesar is the Messiah. When you look at old Hebrew religion, old Hebrew mysticism, they had a belief that every 42 years, history repeats itself in cyclical nature, and a hero, a Messiah or a Christ figure comes up. But they changed all that with the Nicene Creed and these Catholic Roman Empire influences, and they made it to look like the Caesar was the Messiah. And that's where you have the house divided against itself cannot stand. It's mental warfare. The earliest really well thought out civilized propaganda, war propaganda came up is this period of time where the Jewish people who had been very holding their ground against oppression, holding their ground in physical battle against this huge empire, are now divided against themselves, in that some people are going, oh, well, if Josephus is saying that the Caesar is the Messiah, then we start wondering. And then you have the classic dichotomy of, oh, he's not the Messiah. Oh, maybe he is the Messiah. And there's this epic mental warfare going on. And that was sort of the impetus for what we're experiencing now, right? We're experiencing now all this separation anxiety, all this divide and conquer, all this mental warfare with commercials, with all of this programming and media and all this really well thought out propaganda comes from the original propaganda, which was the Bible, which was the rewritten holy text that made a very violent, evil Caesar look like he was one of the Jewish people. He was helping the Jewish people. And that's why you get really weird quotes like, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Why would you give your belongings to the Roman Empire who's oppressing you? It was forcibly put in there. And then you have other things like the Battle of Galilee. We have people that fantasize this Sea of Galilee moment where, oh, the great Christ reaches in and we shall become fishers of men and help these people out of the ocean. The reality of that situation was it was a very well documented battle between Roman Empire and the Judaic kingdom. And Caesar, Titus Flavius was his name, was at that battle as a Roman military general, And what the reality of what happened was Roman Empire, Roman warboats knocked down this Jewish warboat, and they were sinking, and there was Jewish warriors sinking in the ocean, like in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. And they asked the Caesar, the Roman warriors did, what do we do? Do we just leave them to die, or do we help them out? And he said, take your spears and become fishers of men. So literally telling them to attack these Jewish people. So that's a bit of like this dichotomy.
That's some dark history. Yeah.
Yeah. So some, like you were talking about, shadow work is something that when we put light, fluffy rainbows on everything, then the darkness or the evil can kind of sneak around and keep itself amplified. But when you call stuff out, like you're from New York, and say this is what happened, and I don't care what my family said, I don't care what the social norm is, that's what physically happened, then we can come back to this space of, okay, then what does my heart want? What does my soul really want to experience in this life, rather than going with the ancestral norms or going with the social norms, which are absurd, by the way.
Right.
Where we're at, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that society is fucked right now. So why go along with the norms of that?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's also, though, like what you're saying is true, because if you're looking at the Bible or you're looking at any text from a historical standpoint, that's I think actually one of the things the church has done to kind of suppress and repress people as well, is saying that there are people who saw this stuff happen. This is like, we know that, you know, the disciples were real. So there's like, you know, historical documentation to prove that these books are also true. But we are human beings, and we have been human beings for at least 200,000 years, 250,000 years that we know of, with anatomically modern human beings around the planet. And we know that we are artistic creatures, and we speak in metaphor. So those two stories that you were talking about too, like the idea of giving unto Caesar what is Caesar's, like from a metaphorical standpoint, it's like, you don't have to have his coin. You don't have to have all the bullshit that he's saying that you have to use, right? So it's like, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, like, take it back, dude. I don't want to be in the country. I'm happy doing my thing, being a humble fisherman without the Roman Empire being here. Now, of course, it doesn't talk about how to deal with the problem, because if they're murdering your family and you've been oppressed by you know, this tyrannical government, that's problematic. And the same thing with the you know, the story of Jesus pulling you know, disciples out of the water. The whole concept of like looking at it from a magical concept. Jesus saying, hey, you can do this if you believe in yourself, and he's walking on the water, and then his disciples try to do this, and they have doubts about what it is that they can create as their reality, and they start to sink. You know, it's like there's so many different ways to look at this stuff, and it's actually one of the freeing things I think about religion, as opposed to having, you know, a guy in a funny looking robe telling you what it is that you're supposed to think and what these stories mean. Being able to take them in and it being a personal experience, which is what spirituality is in the first place, right? Like, to be a spiritual warrior is also to be a spiritual warrior, like I said, of your own bullshit. You have to actually kind of slay those demons. So, and part of that is being able to be a critical thinker. You know, Jewish mysticism is also, you know, well, I'll say Jewish culture is well known for being great storytellers, right? And that's something that has always been the case. Love me some Woody Allen. It's just like there's an acceptance of how shitty a situation can be, and a way to kind of turn a phrase to make it so that it's funny, and also to get a point across, because a lot of times saying things straight out, people don't listen. You know, so I think things being spoken in metaphor, and it's one of the things that's, you know, we don't know what the cultural context was of a lot of the ancient texts that were written as well, just because, you know, shit changes. It's kind of the way that it is. We don't necessarily know what euphemisms were being used and that type of thing. So I still think that there's a lot that can be taken from it, but I think, like, again, one of my problems growing up in the Southeast was like the literal translation of things. So the fact that you're bringing that up and saying that, like, you know, let's look at this from a different standpoint is one of the really important things for anything that was written. You know, who the person was that wrote it, what the intention was behind what was written, and why it was that certain things were left out. You know, like the Book of Enoch and a lot of the other books that kind of got plucked out through the Council of Nicaea, but it was really like, I mean, there was a frame when they were trying to decide what information they wanted people to have. But like, you know, going back and studying the Dead Sea Scrolls sounds dry and boring, but like, if you really want to understand how it is that we got to where we are, like, that's kind of what you got to do. Right now, I'm listening to the Torah. You know, it's like to be able to go back and listen to the first 5 books of the you know, the Pentateuch, like, go back and listen to the first part of the Bible and just see it from that standpoint and separate it from everything else that happened in the rest of the Old Testament and in the New Testament. I was so bored in church as a kid, and this is exciting shit. And there's so much more stuff that you can get out of it if you actually kind of like take the chains off of it. If you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, you go, I don't need your opinion on what this is. I'm going to take these and interpret it on my own, you know?
Yeah, and the key thing, there was a few huge golden shimmering keys that you threw in with what you just said. One of the keys that shines a bit brightest in my perception is cultural context. Right? When you say cultural context, so relating this all back to Hebrew mysticism, I was just talking with a friend who one of his qigong teachers, so now we're back to qi a bit. One of his qigong teachers, his qigong teacher's father was a prominent judge in California, I believe. And he got recruited by the Masons to be a part of their secret society, which isn't secret anymore. And one of the cultural contexts of Masonry is that it's a sort of blend of Western cultural context, European cultural context, which was feudal, oppressed to the bone. Like, talk about slavery, serfdom, torture, beheading, all this stuff that went down in the United Kingdom, went down in France, all these monarchical places. This sort of blend came about because during the Crusades, when the Roman Empire and when the Western dominator cultures were going to places like Judea or going to places like Turkey or the Mideast or India, they were picking up all these different spiritualities. And one of them was Hebrew mysticism. And they came back to England, to France, and couldn't practice. Like, they'd imagine being in the Crusader times, and you go and you meet this rabbi, this ridiculously wise scroll keeper that gives you this energy healing and does a prayer for you, and all of a sudden you're illuminated and you have this powerful light flowing through you. Then you go back to England, where they behead people for stuff like that, where they burn you at the stake and call you a witch. So that's where the secrecy came in. And culturally, the context of that is people in those areas were so oppressed that they had to hide and sort of obscure themselves in the magic that they were doing. And when you go into the darkness and when you go into hiding, that's where things start to get a bit shady, literally shady. And one of the other contexts of this is that things that were done in ancient times, a lot of them would be very, very weird or totally non-acceptable in modern times. And one of those was sacrifices, right? So you have part of ancient Hebrew magic and part of Masonic practices is that they'll like sacrifice a cow or sacrifice a chicken and do like magic with the blood, and it seems like sort of this kind of horrific thing. But taking what you said, the key of cultural context, imagine yourself in the middle of the Mideast, somewhere around Judea, or imagine yourself in ancient England, where what you have to eat is potatoes in England. So we're talking potatoes, maybe some turnips and radishes, carrots. Like, you don't have that much that you could grow, and you don't have that much capacity as we do now to grow these massive amounts of food. So you make sacrifices, you eat animals. And that was part of the mysticism, and part of the ancient Hebrew mysticism as well, was they would sacrifice the bull, right? When they're going into winter time. Now you put yourself in those places. Winter time in the desert, winter time in cold England without any central heating or hot water or the luxuries we have today. They made sacrifices to animals. So as we...
Well, I think that's... Sorry, I think part of that too, again, is it's metaphorical, right? So like every religion is based off of astrology. That's just the way that it is. We have to be able to accept that and let go of a lot of this, I will say at this point, archaic, dark ages mindset that we have about stuff. A lot of these things, when it comes to sacrifice, what they're referring to, I agree with you what you're saying, because again, it gets to a certain point where you have to sacrifice the things that you have to be able to survive. I think a lot of this stuff also has to do with sacrificing certain aspects of our personalities. So if you're sacrificing a bull, you're sacrificing certain aspects of your Taurian nature, which is stubbornness. It's letting go of comforts. It's letting go of, any of these things. The ram, it's the same thing, the ram's horn. You're letting go of any of the stuff in Aries. So there are ways that these things have been written in these mystery traditions, and Hebrew and Judaism is one of the mystery traditions. We don't know everything about it, and this is kind of why we're talking about it. So when it comes to sacrificing a ram, letting go of some of your eagerness to charge into a new situation, like actually taking time to think about something, so there's a lot of this stuff that I feel like is kind of like let go of, that we just kind of forget about. Jesus is the representation of the Piscean age. And there's, it's all this talk about fishermen throughout the New Testament. Like a lot of this stuff correlates to the original psychology, which is understanding astronomy, or astrology, excuse me, not astronomy. I don't want to get any astronomers pissed off at me.
That is something that really has sparked my brain going a bit, because literally one of the most frustrating things that I've been dealing with recently is astrological. So my south node is Taurus. So for anyone who knows anything about south node, which is kind of like a deeper aspect of astrology, is south node is basically like what your soul is used to, what your soul has been doing for lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. And through this is like, I'm coming to a point where I need to sacrifice that bull. And in modern times, I'm not a Mason or anything like that. I'm not judging them or anything, but I wouldn't go kill a cow. Like I wouldn't go killing any animal, really, is couldn't do it. But like that Taurian kind of cozy, comforting, laying down in the pasture, stubborn, strong kind of raging warrior energy also is like coming to a point where I'm becoming a father, and it has to have to sacrifice that aspect of myself to enter into this new stage of my life, which includes being a father. Is in this day and age, and in many days and ages, this like you have to make sacrifices, and to be
and it
able
doesn't
to,
just because you're sacrificing something doesn't mean that it's gone forever too, right? Like you can sacrifice something for the greater good for a short amount of time, and then you get to enjoy it again. It gives you an appreciation for what the thing was that you let go of.
Yeah, coming back to astrological influence. Now, when we look at Hebrew magic, it ties in very, very beautifully with astrology, because they were master astrologers. Some people might say they're master astronomers as well.
Yeah.
But how would you say that Hebrew astrology or Kabbalic wisdom can help people navigate their path, which is ultimately an astrological path to a great extent? We're all ruled by this cosmos.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, this entire year, I am currently posting every 5 or 6 days the angels of the Shemha Mepharash, which are the angels of the Mercury sphere or the Sun sphere. There are 72 angels if you take the circle that we travel through that is parsed off. By understanding your chart, by knowing where, when you were born or what time you were born, where certain planets are, what aspects that you have in your chart, you can see where you have conflict. If you know astrology, you know that if you have, all of your aspects are going to affect what your personality is and where you're going to have conflict in your life. So if you can get an astrological reading done, or if you can do your own, if you go to astro.com, find out what time you were born and kind of get that stuff put in, you can look up, or if you want to book a session with me, you can find out what angelic energies may be supporting you more, or maybe causing strife with you in your life. So, and again, this comes back to like toning and mantra, being able to find the angelic energy that may be not vibing so well with your Mercury, which is your way that you communicate. If you have something that's causing stress with that, you can use energetics or mantras with the angelic energies to kind of course correct a little bit. If you've got the squares in certain aspects in your chart, being able to work with those tones is going to help you to, again, like bring that shade or that light into your life a little bit more, so that you can kind of see where there's an imbalance. So that's the thing that I have found most beneficial. Again, like I said, I have been recently getting more and more into actual Hebrew mysticism, not just like Western Hermeticism. Because when I started doing magic, you have to learn a certain amount of Hebrew to understand a lot of the ceremonial aspects of magical work. Rabbi Michael Lightman has been a huge inspiration and a great teacher for me. So if you're interested in learning some more modern Kabbalistic things, I think that's a good way to go. There are 3 giant hawks flying around right outside my house right now. He's a great author. The book, I think it's Attaining the Worlds Beyond, is fantastic. And he talks about, when he started to kind of get into, and again, I know I'm tangential. You ask me a question, then I go off to something other direction, and I apologize for that. But when he starts talking about when he started getting into having an interest in Kabbalism, there weren't a lot of places that he knew of to kind of learn, and it was still very secretive. It wasn't necessarily because there was threat like there was during the 1930s and 1940s in Germany, or like it has been for Hebrew, for Jewish people of Jewish lineage for most of history. But it was still kind of like underground, and he talks about, speaking with one of his teachers and then saying, now is the time, the Jewish people were the wisdom keepers. They're the people who kept this stuff safe and sacred and available so that it could be spread out to humanity. People talked about Jesus and like at least in a lot of the Jewish culture, they didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah and that he was born again as the one who was supposed to come back and do that work. And he's saying that now is the time that we are supposed to start learning this information. It's not just, it's not cultural appropriation. It's literally sharing this wisdom that is meant for all of humanity. So you can be a Qabbalist and you don't have to be, you don't have to have been raised Jewish. And it's the same way. You don't have to experience the pain that other people have experienced to be empathetic and to understand where they've come from as well. So there's this aspect of like, I on my podcast, Mantra and Magic, we talk about culture appropriation all the time. And I think it gets to a certain point where it can be problematic if you have a fear of trying to, a fear of cultural appropriation when it comes to other cultures that maybe you weren't raised in or that you don't know a lot about. Have respect with any of these things that you're trying to learn and from any of the people that you're trying to learn them from, and then have a cultural appreciation for it. Because the culture of, the Jewish culture is beautiful. And there has been a lot of displacement throughout all of history. And there is a reason why. We are existing at a time right now. We are in a holy war. All of these wisdom traditions are coming up and becoming more popular because we are moving into the fixed sign of Aquarius. And the last time we were in a fixed sign was in Taurus. We lost, that was another part of the fall of man. We went out of the top part of the zodiac and then we started getting into the lower parts. You got Taurus in opposition to Scorpio, and everything underneath that is as far away from the solar center of the universe as we can possibly get. So we're getting into an incredibly dark time, and we're getting into a time of revelation, right? It really is revelation, as in like we're revealing things. All the stuff hidden, kept secret. We're going into Aquarius, and that is a fixed air sign. So we're going to start going back to the thoughts that we had fixed that made sense to us, that helped us exist in past times. And then we're going to go from that. Once we get another 2,500 years, we're going to move into Capricorn because of the precession of the equinoxes. Everything goes backwards. We're going to move into Capricorn, which is going to be cardinal Earth. And that is going to be the beginning of groundedness, right? So we have to figure out how to make it through this transition. And part of that is being able to, to share the things that we know, and to be able to, again, coming back to shadow work, not ignore the stuff that we've been choosing to willfully ignore in our past. So I know that it's a long way around to get to the answer, but that is one way that you can kind of get back in touch with your astrological, or you can gain some strength in your astrological chart.
Yeah, that talk about the age of Aquarius has been kind of deified and rainbow light and fluffy fluff sprinkled around it, but you hit the nail on the head of what personally I've seen happening, and love that you said the words cultural appreciation, right? Rather, we have such a like dichotomy of, oh, this culture is that culture is that culture is that. I see it as like bacteria, right? Where a lot of what we are, a lot of what makes us able to survive is bacteria, and bacteria creates cultures, right? So depending on your environment, depending on your people that your tribe or your culture is around, you create cultures, right? These cultures pop up like bacteria all over the world. And to say, oh, that culture that's only theirs and I can't learn anything from it, is part of the problem, because if we look at things in such a dichotomy, then we'll never be able to reach what we ultimately want, is shalom, peace. And that comes from coming together. That comes from oneness. And in cultural appreciation, you can go and connect on such a deeper level. Like in my experience, I've gone to Tokyo in Japan and connected with the Buddhist people. I'm 0.1% East Asian, so it's not enough to be like, my grandpa's Japanese. Nah, it's not that, but I have a very small percentage. But the spirits and the wisdom that came from that culture will stay with me forever. When I went to the Native American tribes, picking up their wisdom, when I went to South America, when I went to different parts of Europe and picking up all these different cultural influences, and being from New York, one of the most diverse places on the planet, having friends from Ghana and from China and from Israel and all over the place, from Iran, from all over the place, having connecting with these cultures. It's never a bad idea, I don't think, to learn about somebody else's culture. You don't have to like dress up in a dashiki and start shaking acacia branches around and calling yourself a voodoo priest, and that's like appropriation of like say Swahili culture. But incorporating the wisdom from those people, from those places, can only make you better, can only make you, as long as you have that respect, right? When I went to Hawaii, it was all about the more they let you into their culture was completely dependent on how respectful and loving you were. So as they call it, aloha. So the more aloha spirit you had, the deeper they let you in to their wisdom. And there's not that many Hawaiian people really even left on the planet, because it was such a small place to begin with, and then got oppressed like every other place by colonialism. But the amount of love and the amount of healing that I've been able to offer through Lomi Lomi, through Hawaiian culture, is coming from a place of appreciation. And that's something that we can really all incorporate into our lives, is like connecting with our fellow brother and sister from whatever part of the planet they're from or where their family's from, and saying, hey, what can I learn? I appreciate your culture. What can I learn from your culture? Rather than appropriation would be like showing up in the country and stealing all the gold and saying, look at this beautiful gold I have in the Museum of Natural History. That's appropriation. But
yeah, it's Caesar, like you said. It's coming in and going, put me in that. This is my story now. Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want appropriation. We want appropriate action. That's what we want.
And appropriate action means getting out your Hebrew dictionary and start writing out prayers for the planet and prayers for
Yeah, I will definitely say. Yeah, I will definitely say that working with Hebrew as well, there is something completely different than just writing. Like journaling is great, but like literally writing out the characters, writing and moving right to left. My dreams have become, more vivid over the past like 3 or 4 years. Like I said, my magical practice has completely evolved. So it is something that is, it may not be beneficial because you're not going to go to a Jewish deli and order something. So it's like, but it is beneficial for you and it's beneficial for the planet, because we're made up of this stuff, right? It's all around us. So yeah, I agree, Owen. Like go buy a journal and start learning a language that maybe is a little intimidating, or maybe that attracts you. But I can definitely speak volumes to how much Hebrew has actually helped my understanding of myself and of the world around me.
Yeah, and really just coming full circle in I feel like this is such a powerful thing for people to remember, is that prayer, the power of prayer, is not limited to one religion. And the power of faith is not limited to one religion either. So that's something that I feel like people are losing in the flow into this new age, coming into the new age scene and the new age mysticism. People are naturally rebelling against, oh, I was raised Christian, I'm not going to pray anymore, because they're associating prayer with this force that they considered oppressive in their life. I consider my Catholic upbringing oppressive to a lot of my personal experience of life. And the same thing with faith, like losing touch with the creator or your concept of the great spirit or the Holy Spirit, because it's like, oh no, that's for Christians and I'm not a Christian anymore. My psychic teacher constantly reminds me, say, do your prayers, make sure that you connect with your voice, you connect with your magic in a way that's asking great spirit. I love talking about great spirit because it's like goes beyond religion. It's just, if I say, great spirit, can you please be present with us and help humanity reconnect with nature? A prayer like that is not conforming to a certain religion, not conforming to a certain ideology, but leaving it open so that not only am I feeling, okay, in my heart, this feels right, but also if I was to talk with someone else, like I probably offended some hardcore Christians that are going to watch this, but my ultimate is that I do love you, whoever you are. I do love you, and I do respect your personal connection to the creator, to spirit, and to all that. So changing the language up and changing the way I pray and the way I connect to source or to God or whatever name that you choose is really something that I actually learned from old Hebrew mysticism. Like I have the name of one of the names of God tattooed on my arm, and it's Yod-Veh Had-Veh. And when I asked a Qabbalist because I actually, then now I'm going on my own thing. When I had this dream, and in this dream I saw this symbol, which is basically sacred geometry, 3 triangles connected, and this Hebrew script under it. And in the dream, I got it tattooed on my arm. And I looked up the meaning, and it was the sacred name that they often don't even say in Hebrew mysticism. And it just felt so right. It felt so angelic, and I went and got it tattooed, and it completely changed my life. But the way they relate to God is really beautiful, because they say there's so many names. They have walls and walls of names that you could call God or call the creator, invoking different angelic names. And that's the way we relate to the creator, the universe, in every culture, even beyond Hebrew mysticism. We all have a different name for what we consider to be what we have faith in.
Yeah, I feel very grateful to live in the time that we live in, just to be able to explore, these concepts and to be able to, to have this kind of these teachings available to me, to be completely honest. It's like I had a not the 23andMe, but the ancestry.com thing. I did that a couple of years ago, and it came back and it said that I was, in the original one, it said that I was like 6% Jewish. And I was like, I don't know anybody in my family that's Jewish. So I went and asked family members, and none of my family members knew. And I asked my dad's side of the family, and they were like, "We're Italian." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's not Jewish." And then when I got I went back on to check again, just to kind of I went back onto their website. They had changed their formatting, and it said it had changed to like European, but it was non-specific as to being Jewish. So again, it's like, once I heard that, I was like, this gives me permission to to study some of this stuff from my heritage that I didn't realize that I had. And now I'll go back and look at it. I'm like, well, maybe I'm not Jewish. Maybe the test was wrong or whatever. But I'm like, well, I'm already in. I've already connected. I've already connected, and I've already been affected by the language and by the culture. And it's like, like I said, I was obsessed with Vedic Sanskrit and mantra. And then when I started working with Hebrew, it just I just kind of put those other things to the side. So it's something that's available to all of us. And it is, if you're, like you said, if you're not doing it for yourself, and you can do it for the world, like putting these types of prayers out there and doing it for the greater good, because we're only here that we know of for a short time. And we may as well try to learn and grow and do as much good as we possibly can in the time that we're here.
Beautiful, beautiful point. It's interesting that we have so many similarities. Like we both do, being massage therapists, being Reiki Masters, having connected. That's also the same way I connected with my Hebrew ancestry was I always knew my great grandmother. So my mother's mother's mother was Jewish. So I'm supposed to be Jewish, and I feel more Jewish than Christian. That shout out to Big J, but it's yeah, it's a matriarchal line. So it comes through your mother. And I had a 23andMe test done, and then I had it was either 6.8 or 8% Ashkenazi Jew, which really is a cool point that I'd like to bring up, is that when you look at the archetype of the gypsy or the oracle, this came from Hebrew exiles. So when Rome finally defeated Judea, the Jewish people went into exile all over Europe. And that's some of my ancestors. And one of the things that they did was they shared their mysticism to survive at that point, because they were in exile. So they shared their mysticism in the form of utilizing crystals, utilizing connecting to your past lives, connecting to psychic information, astrology, all of these things. That sort of storybook like gypsy and the caravan with the crystal ball and telling you your future. It's Jewish. It's Hebrew mysticism, which is really something that I've been able to create beautiful success spiritually, financially, physically, metaphysically, through oracular work, through divination, and to have ancestors that have passed those gifts down through Hebrew mysticism is something beautiful that like you said, we have this information available. We can literally sit down and look at a book and say, oh, whoa, that's where my great grandmother's family was from. Oh, wow, look at this is the culture of my great, great, great ancestors, that without the internet, how could you have found that? You would have to go to the root of that place and speak the language of that people to, in the past, figure out what we can learn now.
Well, and trying to track down family members, like if you don't have a home and you're constantly on the go, like where do you go? It's not an easy way to track. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that nomadic roots I think every culture is more mobile in their history than what we practice today.
Mhm.
That's something that I highly encourage everyone watching this. If you have an adventure that you want to take, if you feel like your heart says go to Japan, your heart says go to Peru, your heart says go to Canada, or wherever you're being called to, make that journey and make it a quest, because that's something we've lost in this sort of coming out of that age of Taurus into age of Aquarius, is coming out of like my favorite book of all time, The Hobbit, coming out of the Shire, this like comfortable kicking back, smoking weed, smoking your cigarette, having a nice 2 breakfast meal, start your morning, and coming out of that and going into the world, going out there. And that's what saved my life. Honestly, if I stayed in New York and never traveled, I'd be a mess. I'd guarantee you, if I had never decided to do what I did and go live abroad and go road trip and go on this adventure that brought me to where I am today, I'm telling you, it would have not been pretty. The road to healing was a literal road. Like, I had to get out of the place that made me who I was, but also made me a bit sick. I had to get out of it to really heal and to find that mystical nature that came from connecting to all different cultures around the world.
Do you have any planets in Sagittarius?
Ha! Yes, my Jupiter.
Okay, there you go. Makes sense. Do you know what house it's in?
Not sure, but
Well,
I think
matter.
that's a good note to will call it a day, call it a night for this talk, and because now I want to exchange with you and do some Hebrew astrology. So sorry, audience, but my selfish nature.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Owen. This has been a blast. It's great to catch up with you and to be able to chat about stuff that we're both passionate about. So if people want to find me, you can find me on Instagram. It's at Jeremy Renta. My website is jeremyrenta.com. If you are in the Boulder area, you can come and get a massage with me. You can reach out and book an energy session with me, an energy healing session or a massage session. And I'm also doing coaching, and like we were talking about, the astrological coaching. So if anybody's interested in that, you can find me there.
Yeah, big love to everyone, big gratitude to everyone. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing this space. I was having a rough day today, so I didn't even know if I would be able to show up in the way I normally do for these this new show that I've been doing, but infinitely grateful for you, and for anyone who is wondering about Jeremy's skills or Jeremy's profession, like his professionalism. When we first met, we did an exchange, whereas I did a Akashic past life reading for Jeremy, and he did a very Hebrew mystical Reiki and massage session for myself, and it was fantastically healing to be able to get that level of healing. Comes from somebody who's a Jedi Master like Jeremy. You can't find that easily, but you found it. If you're watching us too, you're watching 2 Jedi Masters that have come down and tried to help shit out, sort shit out in the world. Yeah, so they'll put that as our big message to the world. We love you. Om Shanti Shalom. Shalom, shalom, shalom.
Yeah, peace, 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 baby.